The storm had turned the road into a river of black mud, but Mara Bennett kept walking. She held her 8-year-old son Eli's hand tightly, feeling his small fingers trembling inside hers. Rain soaked their jackets, their shoes squished with every step, and wind cut across their faces. Mara wanted to stop. She wanted to tell Eli that everything would be all right, but she had already made too many promises she could not keep. For 3 weeks, they had slept wherever they could find shelter. A bus station one night, a church basement another, 2 nights beneath an awning. Tonight, even that was gone. Eli stumbled. "Mom, are we going to sleep outside again?" Mara swallowed the ache in her throat. "No, sweetheart, not tonight." She did not know where they would sleep. She could not let her son see her fear. Then Eli stopped walking. "Mom, look." Beyond a line of twisted trees, a mansion rose against the stormy sky. Its windows were dark. Its stone walls were stained with age, and iron gates hung open. Mara stared at it. She had heard stories about that house. People in town called it the Vale Mansion. They said its owner had vanished nearly 20 years ago, and no family member had lived there since. "We're not going in," Mara whispered. A gust shook the trees. Eli began shivering. Mara looked at her son's pale face, then at the mansion again. Fear was dangerous, but freezing to death was worse. She took his hand and walked toward the broken gate. The side door gave way with a soft groan. Inside, darkness swallowed them. The air smelled of dust, damp wood, and something strangely familiar, like an old fireplace used recently. Mara lifted her phone for light. Furniture stood beneath white sheets. Portraits watched from shadowed walls. Somewhere upstairs, a floorboard creaked. Then Eli pointed toward the dusty hallway. "Mom, someone walked here." Mara looked down. Fresh footprints crossed the dust. They led deeper into the mansion. Mara followed the footprints only far enough to convince herself that she should not follow them at all. They disappeared near a grand staircase, where darkness swallowed the upper floor. She turned back and guided Eli toward the kitchen. "Morning," she whispered. "We leave at morning." Eli nodded, though his teeth were still chattering. The kitchen looked as forgotten as the rest of the house, but a small pile of dry firewood sat beside an enormous stone fireplace. Mara found matches in a drawer, and soon flames flickered against the walls. For the first time that night, Eli smiled. Mara found 2 cans of soup in an old pantry. Their labels were faded, but the cans were sealed. She warmed them over the fire and divided the food carefully between them. Eli ate every drop. "Can we stay here tomorrow?" Mara looked at him. "No, this isn't our house, but it's warm." Her heart tightened. Warm. That single word reminded her how little her son had been asking for lately. Not toys, not games, not expensive food, just warmth. After they finished eating, Mara spread an old blanket across a couch. Eli curled beneath it, exhausted. Mara remained awake. The mansion made strange noises. Pipes groaned behind the walls. Wind pushed against the windows. Somewhere above them, something scraped slowly across a wooden floor. She told herself it was the storm. Then Eli suddenly sat up. "Mom, what?" "I heard someone walking." Mara froze. She listened. Nothing. She picked up the flashlight and climbed halfway up the staircase. The upper hallway was empty. When she returned, she noticed something that made her stomach tighten. A door beside the library stood open. She was certain it had been closed before. Mara crossed the room and pulled it shut. Behind it was a narrow staircase descending into darkness. She locked the door with an old brass latch and returned to Eli. "Stay away from that door," she whispered. "Why?" "Because I said so." Later, when Mara finally closed her eyes, the grandfather clock in the hall began ticking. It had no hands, and yet, somewhere in the darkness, it struck 3 times. Morning arrived, gray and bitter. The storm had weakened, but the road outside was still flooded. Mara decided they would wait until the water receded. She told Eli to stay downstairs while she searched for anything useful. Eli promised. He lasted less than 10 minutes. Curiosity pulled him toward the library. The room smelled of old paper and cedar. Tall shelves covered 3 walls, while dozens of framed photographs rested across a dusty desk. Eli wiped one with his sleeve. A family appeared beneath the glass. A stern-looking man stood beside an elegant woman. Between them was a young girl. Eli stared. "Mom." Mara entered and saw him holding a larger photograph. "What did you find?" "The boy?" Mara frowned. "What boy?" Eli pointed to the background. Near a stone fountain stood a young boy, perhaps 10 years old. His face was turned toward the camera. Mara took the photograph. Her breath stopped. The boy had Eli's eyes. Not similar eyes. The same dark, unusually wide eyes. He even had the small scar-shaped mark beside his eyebrow. "That's strange," Mara whispered. "Is he family?" "I don't know." She placed the photograph down. Then she noticed writing on the back. The ink had faded, but one sentence remained readable. "If you're reading this, they haven't found it yet." Mara's skin prickled. Who wrote that? She searched the desk and found an old book with a torn spine. Inside it was another piece of paper. This time, only 3 words were written. "Trust no one." Mara immediately folded both papers and put them into her coat. Eli watched her. "Mom, are we in trouble?" "No." The answer came too quickly. Eli knew her well enough to hear the fear behind it. Mara looked toward the library door. For 18 years, the Vale mansion had supposedly been empty. Yet someone had left messages inside it. Someone had preserved photographs. And someone had apparently been waiting for a person to find them. Mara suddenly wanted to leave more than ever. But when she opened the front door, she saw tire tracks in the mud. They were fresh. And they stopped directly outside the mansion. Mara pulled Eli away from the front door. Back inside, a dark vehicle sat near the trees beyond the property. She could not see the driver, but she knew someone was watching. Then the vehicle moved, slowly at first. Then it disappeared behind the trees. Eli looked frightened. Who was that? "I don't know." Mara locked the door. She searched the mansion for another exit. Moving quickly through rooms she had been too afraid to explore the night before. Near the servants' quarters, she discovered a narrow corridor. Unlike the rest of the house, it contained almost no dust. A chair had recently been moved. A lantern stood on the floor. Beside it was a plastic bottle of water. Mara touched it. Cold. Recently used. Someone had been living inside the mansion, or coming here regularly. Her breathing quickened. She grabbed Eli's hand. They returned to the library and hid behind a tall wooden cabinet. Night came early beneath the storm clouds. Then they heard the front door open. Mara covered Eli's mouth. Footsteps crossed the foyer. Slow. Measured. Whoever had entered wasn't afraid. A door opened downstairs. Then another. The footsteps moved closer. Mara held her breath. The library door creaked. A shadow appeared beneath it. The handle began turning. Eli squeezed her hand. Mara prepared herself to run. Then a loud crash came from the opposite side of the mansion. The stranger stopped. Footsteps hurried away. Mara waited. 1 minute, 2, 5. Finally, she moved toward the door. Something lay on the floor outside. An old photograph. Mara picked it up. On the front was the same family she had seen earlier. On the back, fresh ink formed a message. "Leave before you learn what your son is connected to." Mara stared at the words. Her fear changed into something colder. Someone knew about Eli. Someone knew they were here. And someone was afraid of what Mara might discover. Mara waited until dawn before examining Eli's documents. She had carried the envelope for years. It contained his birth certificate, hospital papers, and the few records she had managed to preserve after losing almost everything. She spread them across the library table. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then she noticed the names. One document listed Eli's father as Daniel Bennett. Another contained a different surname, Vale. Mara stared at it. Her fingers went numb. She had always believed the discrepancy was a clerical mistake. Years ago, she had been young, frightened, and struggling. She had never had the money or strength to investigate. Now she understood that someone might have wanted her to ignore it. Eli wandered into the room. "What are you doing?" "Looking for something." "Did you find it?" Mara looked at him. "I might have." Before she could say more, Eli noticed a loose wooden panel beneath the desk. He pulled it outward. A small metal box fell into his hands. Mara opened it. Inside were several documents tied with faded ribbon. One mentioned Nathaniel Vale. Another referred to a secret trust. Then she found a handwritten sentence. My grandson must never be allowed to disappear the way his father did. Mara stopped breathing. Grandson? She read it again. Eli was watching her. Mom? She couldn't answer. She turned another page. The document described a child whose identity had been concealed for protection. The birth date matched Eli. The mother's name matched hers. Mara's eyes filled with tears. No, she whispered. But the evidence was becoming impossible to deny. Eli might not simply be connected to the Vale family. He might belong to it. Then every light in the mansion suddenly came on. The chandeliers blazed overhead. Eli jumped. Mara looked toward the hallway. Someone had restored the electricity. The house was awake, and whoever had activated it knew exactly where they were. Mara followed the electrical wiring into a narrow maintenance passage. It led toward the staircase she had discovered on their first night. The brass latch was still in place, but the metal box contained a key. She held it for several seconds. Then she inserted it into the lock. The door opened. Cold air rose from below. Mara took Eli's hand. They descended slowly. At the bottom stood an iron door. The key opened that too. Beyond it was a room untouched by the decay above. There was no dust, no broken furniture. Everything had been preserved. A desk stood beneath a green-shaded lamp. Filing cabinets covered one wall. Photographs filled another. Mara approached the desk. Newspaper clippings described Nathaniel Vale's disappearance 18 years earlier. He had been a wealthy businessman, known for donating millions to charities. One article claimed he had abandoned his family. Another suggested financial problems. But the documents in the room told a different story. Nathaniel had discovered massive fraud inside his own company. Money had been transferred through secret accounts. Property had been stolen through false agreements. Several family members were involved. His son Daniel had tried to expose the scheme. Then Daniel disappeared. Mara felt dizzy. Daniel, Eli's father. She looked at another photograph. A younger Daniel stood beside Nathaniel. The resemblance to Eli was unmistakable. Mara turned the photograph over. A message had been written there. If anything happens to me, protect my grandson. Mara's knees weakened. The boy from the photograph. The hidden records. The altered birth documents. Everything connected. Eli was Nathaniel Vale's grandson. And if the documents were authentic, Eli was the heir to a fortune that powerful. People had spent nearly 2 decades hiding. But money was not the most frightening discovery. Nathaniel had left evidence, proving that his own family had destroyed lives to protect it. A sound came from the passage. Someone was coming. Mara extinguished the lamp. Darkness swallowed the room. Mara pulled Eli behind the filing cabinets. 2 men entered the secret room. Their shoes scraped against the floor. One carried a flashlight. The other held a leather case. They've searched everywhere, the first man said. Not everywhere, the second replied. Mara held Eli against her. She recognized the second man's voice. It was the man she had seen near the trees. He walked directly toward Nathaniel's desk. The evidence has to be here, he said. After 18 years, he never trusted anyone. He hid everything. The first man lowered his voice. And if the boy is alive, silence followed. Then the answer came. Then the inheritance becomes a problem. Mara felt Eli tremble. She understood. They weren't searching for Nathaniel anymore. They were searching for Eli's future. The men opened drawers. Mara knew they would find the metal box if she waited. She looked around desperately. Then Eli pointed toward the floor. A narrow line ran beneath the cabinet. Mara moved it just enough to reveal a concealed passage. She and Eli slipped inside. The passage was barely wide enough for them. Behind them, a drawer slammed open. Someone's been here. Mara pulled Eli forward. They crawled through darkness until the passage opened beneath the old servants' quarters. They escaped upstairs, but the metal box remained behind. For a moment, Mara felt hopeless. Then Eli whispered, "Mom, what?" "I remember the desk." "What about it?" "There was a symbol carved into it." Mara stopped. She remembered it too. A small circle surrounded by 3 lines. The same symbol appeared on the photograph. They followed it through the mansion. Behind a loose section of wall, they found another narrow door. Mara opened it. Beyond it was a staircase descending deeper underground. At the bottom stood a steel door. No lock, no handle, only the same symbol. Mara pressed it. The door opened, and behind it was a vault. The vault contained enough documents to explain why people had been willing to kill for silence. Bank records filled metal shelves. Property deeds were stacked in boxes. Photographs showed meetings between family members and executives. There were recordings, contracts, handwritten ledgers, and copies of letters Nathaniel had sent before his disappearance. Mara understood that the Vale fortune had not disappeared. It had been divided. Millions had been transferred into private accounts. Businesses had been quietly sold. Properties had changed ownership through forged documents. And Daniel had discovered the scheme. Then Mara found a small cassette recorder. She pressed play. Nathaniel's voice filled the vault. "If you are hearing this, I failed to stop them." Mara's eyes filled with tears. Nathaniel explained that he had hidden his grandson because the people responsible for the fraud had begun searching for the child. He had arranged for Daniel's son to disappear from the family's records. The boy's identity had been changed. His mother had been kept away from the Vale name. Nathaniel had hoped that one day the truth could be restored. Mara looked at Eli. He was listening silently. The recording continued. "The inheritance is not enough. The evidence must survive. Without the evidence, they will simply call the boy a fraud." Mara realized what she had to do. They needed everything. The documents, the recording, the photographs, the legal records. But footsteps echoed above them. The men had found the passage. Mara quickly gathered the smallest evidence she could carry. Then a loud crash shook the vault. Someone was trying to force the door. Eli looked at her. "Mom, what do we do?" Mara tightened her grip around his hand. "For once," she whispered, "we stop running." But she knew they couldn't stay. She had discovered the truth. Now they had to survive long enough to prove it. Mara searched the vault for another exit. Behind a shelf, she found a narrow tunnel leading toward the old carriage house. They crawled through it while the men continued searching behind them. When Mara emerged outside, dawn was beginning to break. She and Eli hid inside an abandoned storage room until the vehicle disappeared. Only then did Mara realize she was holding Nathaniel's final envelope. She opened it. Inside was a letter addressed to the child who would one day discover the mansion. Nathaniel wrote that he never wanted his grandson to inherit a fortune built on fear. He wanted the boy to understand where the money came from and why it had been hidden. Then came the sentence that broke Mara's heart. "I could not save my son. I pray I can still save his child." Mara pressed the letter against her chest. Eli looked at her. "Was Grandpa trying to save me?" "Yes." "Did he know me?" "No," Mara whispered. "But he never stopped trying." There was one final recording. Nathaniel appeared on a small screen. His face looked older than in the photographs. He explained that Daniel had tried to expose the family fraud. Before Daniel disappeared, he had hidden evidence inside the mansion. Nathaniel had followed the trail and discovered that several relatives were responsible. He had feared they would kill Daniel. He had also feared they would come for Eli. The recording ended with a final instruction. "Trust the woman who brings him home." Mara stared at the screen. She understood what Nathaniel meant. The mansion had been waiting for Eli, not for a wealthy heir. For a child who had lost everything and a mother who had refused to abandon him. But Mara knew discovery was not enough. They needed someone powerful enough to make the evidence impossible to bury. She remembered the attorney's name on Nathaniel's documents. For the first time in years, Mara allowed herself to hope. The attorney nearly refused to believe her. Mara understood why. She arrived wearing a rain-stained jacket, carrying an old backpack, with a frightened child beside her. She did not look like the heir to a fortune. She looked like a woman who had spent too long surviving. But then she placed Nathaniel's documents on the desk. The attorney read the first page. Then the second. His expression changed. He examined the recording. He compared the birth records. Finally, he looked at Eli. "Who is your father?" "Daniel Bennett," Eli answered. The attorney closed his eyes. His name wasn't Bennett. Mara's stomach tightened. He was Daniel Vale. The investigation began within days. Financial experts examined the records. Authorities recovered additional evidence from the mansion. The recordings matched documents found in corporate archives. Bank transfers were traced. Properties were seized. People who had spent 18 years, believing the truth was buried, suddenly found themselves answering questions. The two men who had searched the mansion were identified. Their connection to the Vale family's former business was uncovered. They had been hired to recover the evidence before anyone else could find it. But they had failed. Mara's testimony, combined with the documents and recordings, reopened the case surrounding Daniel Vale. The truth spread quickly. Eli's identity was legally confirmed. He was the grandson Nathaniel had protected, and he was the rightful heir to the remaining Vale estate. Yet when Mara told Eli, he didn't ask how much money they would receive. He only asked one thing. Does this mean we can have a home? Mara looked at him. Tears filled her eyes. Yes, she said. This time, it wasn't a promise she was afraid to keep. The legal battle lasted months. Mara expected it to be ugly. She was right. People who had once ignored her suddenly appeared with lawyers, opinions, and claims about the Vale estate. Some questioned Eli's identity. Others argued that the fortune should be divided among distant relatives. But Nathaniel had prepared for them. His documents were precise. His instructions were witnessed. His evidence was overwhelming. Eventually, the court recognized Eli as the surviving heir. The mansion became legally his. So did the remaining family assets. Mara could have sold everything immediately. Instead, she kept the mansion. Not because she loved its grandeur. She remembered the first night. The cold. The darkness. Eli shaking beneath an old blanket. The mansion had once frightened them. Now she wanted to make it useful. She restored the property. Rooms that had been empty for years became temporary apartments for families. Escaping homelessness. The kitchen served meals. The library became a community center. Mara established a foundation in Nathaniel's name. Its purpose was simple. Help families who had nowhere to go. Eli grew up surrounded by opportunities he had never imagined. But Mara made one thing clear. You were valuable before the inheritance. Eli never forgot it. Years later, he would sometimes walk through the mansion alone. He would stop in the library and look at the photograph that had started everything. The boy in that picture no longer seemed mysterious. He was family. And the mansion was no longer a place of fear. It was home. Yet one question remained. What had truly happened to Daniel? The answer waited inside Nathaniel's final sealed file. The final file revealed what Nathaniel had feared all those years. Daniel had discovered the financial fraud and tried to expose it. He had been followed, threatened, forced to disappear. Nathaniel had spent the remaining years protecting the evidence and keeping Eli's existence hidden. The people who wanted the truth buried had believed that poverty made Mara powerless. They were wrong. The woman they barely noticed had become the person who carried their entire secret into the light. Months later, Mara stood outside the restored mansion with Eli beside her. Children played across the lawn. Families who once had nowhere to sleep now had warm rooms inside the building. The windows that had once been dark glowed with light. Eli looked toward the enormous front doors. Do you remember when we first came here? Mara smiled. I remember. You were scared. I was terrified. Eli laughed softly. So was I. Mara looked at the mansion. For years, people had called it cursed. They had said its halls contained nothing but old memories and bad luck. But they had been wrong. The mansion had been holding a secret, and that secret had been waiting for someone brave enough to find it. Eli reached for his mother's hand. Do you ever wish we never came? Mara looked at him. No. She thought about the storm. The broken gate. The cold hallway. The footprints in the dust. Every frightening moment had led them here. They had entered the mansion looking for one night of shelter. They had found an identity. They had uncovered a crime. They had recovered a stolen legacy. And they had given a forgotten family its truth. But most importantly, Mara had given her son something money could never purchase. A future without fear. Inside the library, Nathaniel's photograph remained beside the letter he had written years earlier. The mansion was no longer abandoned. It was alive again. And the secret that had been buried for 18 years had finally become a legacy of hope.